Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's at the very heart of global commerce. It's one of those rare but really disruptive events that can completely derail a massive deal. We're going to unpack the official rules that keep trade moving, even when a key piece of the puzzle goes missing. So let's just jump right in. What if the documents for a $1 million deal just vanished while they were in transit? I want you to imagine this for a second. You've done everything right. You've manufactured the goods, you've shipped them out to a buyer on the other side of the planet. Your part is done. But that one crucial packet of documents, the bill of lading, the invoice, the very key that unlocks your payment, it just disappears. What happens then? Who's on the hook for that?
That nightmare scenario, that is exactly the problem we're going to tackle today. For anyone involved in global trade, this is a huge fundamental challenge. The goods are literally on a ship, sailing across an ocean. But your payment? It all hangs on a single packet of paper showing up where it's supposed to. And when it doesn't, it really feels like the whole thing could just fall apart.
But, and this is the important part, there is a system in place for this exact situation. So stick with me, because by the end of this explainer, you're going to understand the crucial international rule that covers all of this. You'll know exactly who bears the risk, and more importantly, how the system is designed to stop a simple mail mishap from wrecking a huge deal.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about why these documents are so important in the first place. Then, we'll get into the actual rules of the game. After that, we'll look at the bank's disclaimer, discover something I'm calling the Unbreakable promise, and finally, we'll walk through how you actually fix the situation when documents go missing.
Okay, let's dive into our first section, lost in transit. The big idea here is that in global trade, documents are every bit as valuable as the goods themselves. The paperwork isn't just administrative fluff. In a lot of ways, the paperwork is the transaction. The whole system is built on this foundation of trust in those documents.
And nothing says it better than this quote right from the rulebook, UCP 600, Article 5. It says, "Banks deal with documents and not with goods." What does that mean? It means the bank financing the deal. They're not going to the port to inspect your cargo. They don't care if the textiles are the right shade of blue. Their entire world, their whole reality, is the paperwork. Do the documents line up perfectly with what the credit requires? If they do, then for the bank, it's a good deal. And that's why losing them is such a big, big problem.
All right, so if everything really does hinge on these documents, you'd hope there's a super clear rule book, right? Well, there is. Let's get into the rules of the game and introduce the UCP 600, which is the official rulebook for all this.
The main tool we're talking about here is called a documentary credit. You might also hear it called an LC. Now, the simplest way to think about it is like a conditional promise from the buyer's bank. The bank is saying, "Hey seller, we promise to pay you, but you have to give us a perfect set of documents first." It's a great system because it protects the seller from not getting paid, and it protects the buyer from the goods not being shipped. It's basically like a super secure escrow service, but for paperwork handled by banks.
And the set of rules that governs these documentary credits, that's the UCP 600. It stands for Uniform Customs and Practice for Documentary Credits. This isn't just some local guideline. It's the global standard published by the International Chamber of Commerce. Whether you're in Singapore or Brazil, this is the instruction manual. It makes sure everyone, everywhere, is playing by the exact same rules.
Okay, so we've got the rule book. Now let's look at the bank's disclaimer. We're going to zoom in on a specific rule, Article 35, because this is the one that tells us what happens when documents get lost. And it starts with a really important point about the bank's liability.
So the first part of this rule, Article 35, is pretty clear. Let's walk through it. Step 1, the documents are sent out, following all the instructions in the credit, using the right courier, sending it to the right address. Step 2, somewhere along the way, those documents get lost or delayed. Now, here's the key part, Step 3, the bank that sent them assumes no liability or responsibility for that loss. This makes sense, right? It protects the bank from things it just can't control, like a delivery truck breaking down or a package getting missorted.
And what's really interesting is that this isn't some new idea. If you look back, this principle, that banks aren't responsible for stuff lost in transit, has been around for a long, long time. It was first mentioned way back in 1933. And since then, it's just been updated. It used to mention telex, then it was broadened to cover any telecommunication. And the latest version, the UCP 600 from 2007, specifically calls out documents lost in transit. This just goes to show you how foundational this idea really is to the whole system.
Okay, so a bank sends the documents, they get lost, the bank isn't responsible. Got it. But wait a minute. If that was the end of the story, this whole system would be incredibly risky for the person selling the goods, right? Well, this leads us to the most critical part of this whole explainer. We're talking about the unbreakable promise, a huge exception that keeps global trade from grinding to a halt. So, to get this unbreakable promise, we first need to understand a key player, the nominated bank. Now, in a lot of these deals, the seller doesn't just mail the document straight to the buyer's bank, which might be thousands of miles away. Instead, the buyer's bank will authorize or nominate another bank, usually one right there in the seller's country, to act on its behalf. This nominated bank's job is to take the documents from the seller, check them to make sure they're perfect, and often to go ahead and pay the seller right then and there. And this is where it all comes together. This is the crucial difference. Look at this first scenario. The seller, or the beneficiary, sends the documents directly to the buyer's bank. If they get lost on the way, that's the seller's problem. The buyer's bank's promise to pay hasn't kicked in yet. But now look at the second scenario, where it goes through a nominated bank. This is the absolute game changer. If that nominated bank looks at the documents and says, yep, these are good, they comply, and then forwards them, and then they get lost, the buyer's bank still has to pay. The promise is locked in. The moment the nominated bank gave its okay, the risk shifted from the seller over to the banking system. The promise became unbreakable.
So you might be asking, why does this rule even exist? It's really all about keeping the system moving. It's about trust and liquidity. Think about it. If this rule wasn't there, no nominated bank would ever pay a seller up front. They'd wait weeks for the documents to safely arrive at the other end. That would cause massive delays and tie up money. This rule gives those nominated banks the confidence they need to check the documents and pay the seller quickly. And that speed is what keeps the wheels of global trade turning. So now we get it. The buyer's bank has to pay. But how? They don't have the original documents. This brings us to our next section, recreating the presentation. Let's look at the practical, real-world steps for how this whole mess gets sorted out.
Okay, so how do we actually recreate a lost presentation? Well, it's not about pointing fingers. It's about working together. First, the banks have to start talking to each other. Then, a new presentation is made, but this time using copies of all the original documents. And here's a super important point. The buyer's bank cannot insist on getting new originals. They have to accept the copies. From there, they examine the copies, just like they would have examined the originals, and as soon as they receive that set of copies, their payment clock, that 5-day window they have, starts ticking.
And this quote from an official opinion by the ICC really says it all. It is the responsibility of the concerned parties to find a solution. See, the point of all these rules isn't to figure out who to blame. It's to give everyone a roadmap, a framework, so the banks involved can just work together and solve the problem. The deal was solid, the documents were correct when they were checked, so the system makes sure there's a way to see it through to the end. So let's boil it all down to the main takeaway. The UCP 600 framework is built to be strong. It ensures that a simple, everyday accident, like a lost package, doesn't break a bank's fundamental promise to pay. As long as everyone follows the rules, especially the part about using a nominated bank, the deal is safe. It's a whole system built on rules and trust that ultimately protects everyone in the transaction.
And this all leads to a really interesting question for the future. We spent all this time talking about physical pieces of paper getting lost in transit. But what happens as trade goes digital? As we move to electronic documents and paperless systems, will this whole lost in transit problem finally, truly become a thing of the past?
I'd really love to know what you think about this. Is the shift to digital trade documents the ultimate solution? Or does it just trade one problem for another? You know, instead of lost mail, we're dealing with data breaches and server crashes. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And hey, if you found this explainer helpful, if it cleared some things up for you, do us a favor and hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the complex topics that make our world work.
Thanks so much for watching The Explainer. We'll see you next time.